The corporate auditor was standing by the fry station when my general manager finally understood. She had my notebook in one hand and his own closing checklist in the other, and she was reading the same 12 violations I had warned him about 6 weeks earlier. He kept looking at me like I had somehow walked into his office and stolen the floor out from under him. By lunch, the store was locked, 3 repair vans were in the parking lot, and payroll was pulling edited time records for every closing employee. He had shaved my overtime down to 40 hours because he thought a 20-year-old shift lead would be too scared to push back. What he missed was that I had stopped arguing and started documenting. Here's how a mop bucket, a time clock, and one routine audit turned into the last day he ever managed that store. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, because stories like this happen in more workplaces than people want to admit. A quick note: some details have been changed for privacy and storytelling, but the emotions and the lesson at the center of this are real. The first thing I remember from that morning was the sound of the fryer alarm. It was a sharp little beep that cut through the drive-through headset, the soda machine, and the music we were not supposed to play after opening. It was 9:17 on a Thursday. The breakfast rush had just started to thin out, and 2 women from corporate were standing near the line in plain dark jackets, looking like they had already seen enough. My general manager, Victor Lane, came through the side door with his sunglasses still on top of his head and a paper coffee cup in his hand. He had that fast manager walk he used when he wanted everyone to think he had control of a room he had not actually looked at yet. He saw me first. Then he saw the clipboard in the auditor's hand. Then he saw the red tag hanging from the walk-in cooler handle, and his face changed in a way I will never forget. It did not collapse all at once. It happened in steps. Confusion, annoyance, recognition, then something close to fear, though he tried to cover it by smiling at the auditor like she was a customer who had complained about cold fries. "Morning," he said. "Nobody told me we had visitors." The auditor said, "It was scheduled. Your district calendar shows confirmation from this store." Victor looked at me. "Marcus, why didn't you call me?" I was standing by the prep table with my apron tied too tight around my waist. My palms were sweating inside the food-safe gloves. I wanted to say, "Because the last time I warned you about something, you told me to worry about mopping." I did not say that. Not yet. I just said, I was on the line. That was the moment from the hook. But to understand why he looked like that, I have to go back to the beginning of the year, when I was still dumb enough to think Victor was lazy, not dangerous. I was 20 years old, which is old enough to be tired and young enough that older managers still call you kid when they want to make your opinion smaller. I worked at a busy fast food franchise off the highway, one of those stores with a drive-through wrapped around the building like a belt and a lobby that smelled like coffee, fryer oil, and floor cleaner no matter how hard you scrubbed. We served breakfast at 5, lunch by 10:30, and dinner until midnight. On Fridays, because of the bars 2 exits over, we stayed busy until almost close. My title was shift lead. That meant I made 50 cents more than crew, held the keys when the assistant manager was gone, answered customer complaints, counted drawers, did temperature logs, and got blamed for everything that happened between the hours nobody in the office wanted to work. I was not management in the way that mattered. I could not hire anyone. I could not approve raises. I could not edit the schedule. But if the line backed up, if the walk-in was messy, if a new kid put raw chicken tongs on the sandwich station, suddenly I was management enough to get yelled at. I needed the job. That is important. Revenge stories can make it sound like people are just waiting for a dramatic moment to take a stand, but most people with rent due do not live like that. I shared a 2-bedroom apartment with my cousin Andre, paid my half of the utilities, helped my mom when her car insurance jumped, and was taking an online food safety certification course at night. The course was supposed to help me move into kitchen management somewhere better. Not fancy, just better. A grocery commissary, a hotel kitchen. Anywhere with regular hours and a manager who did not treat labor law like a suggestion box. The certificate mattered because our franchise owner had told me, in front of Victor, that if I finished it and kept my attendance clean, they could sign off on supervised hours. That sign-off was the difference between just having a test result and having something I could actually use on applications. Victor knew that. He mentioned it whenever I annoyed him. "Don't get ahead of yourself with that certificate," he told me one night while we were counting drawers. "A paper does not make you ready to run a store." I said, "No, but it helps." He smiled without looking up from the cash. "It helps if your manager says you understand operations." That was the first time I heard the hook in his voice. Not the threat yet. Just the shape of it. Victor was 38, maybe 40, and had been with the chain long enough to confuse survival with competence. He wore pressed black polos with his name embroidered in red, carried 2 phones, and talked about labor percentage the way some people talk about religion. He could make a schedule tight enough to squeak. He could also vanish for 3 hours during dinner rush and return with a smoothie from a place across town, while the rest of us were scraping burned cheese off the grill. His office was a square room behind the safe with a window that looked over the back line. He kept the blinds halfway open. Not all the way open, because that would make him visible too. Halfway. Enough that you could see his shadow move when he leaned back in his chair. Enough that you remembered he could see you, even when he was not helping. The crew knew how to work around him. Carmen, our fastest drive-through person, called him Forecast because he was always predicting a rush he would not help with. Jay, who did prep, said Victor managed by printer. He would print a checklist, put it on a clipboard, and act like the clipboard had cooked the food. Nia, who was 19 and still nervous enough to apologize to customers who were wrong, avoided his office completely. She had a way of shrinking when he said her name. Then there was Ron Beals, the regional trainer. Ron was not at our store every day. He came through every few months to train new assistant managers, check food safety habits, and remind everyone that the company had policies written in real words. He had gray hair, steel-toed shoes, and the calm of a man who had seen every version of a bad store and no longer confused noise with urgency. The first time Ron watched me do a closing temp log, he said, "You're taking the course, right?" I said, "Yeah, online. It is more boring than I expected." "Good," he said. "Boring means it was written after someone got sued. Pay attention to the boring parts." I laughed because I thought he was joking. Later, I understood he was giving me advice. Our store did a lot of things right when District was around. That was the trick. We knew the theater. When Victor got word of a visit, the cracked ice scoop disappeared, the sanitizer strips came out, the mop sink got cleared, and the prep labels suddenly had actual times on them. A corporate person could walk in at 2 in the afternoon and see a store that looked tired but acceptable. The real store came out after 9 at night, when the dinner lead went home, labor got cut, and the closing crew had to do 4 people's jobs with 2 people's bodies. That was when the shortcuts showed up. Chicken boxes left on the floor because the freezer shelves were packed wrong. Sanitizer buckets too weak because nobody wanted to change them during a rush. Hot-hold pans pushed past their discard times because Victor hated waste reports. The ice machine scoop resting on top of the machine instead of in a holder. A mop bucket parked near dry storage because the utility closet door stuck and nobody had fixed it. One violation by itself could be an accident. 12 in a pattern was not an accident. It was how the store actually ran. At first, I noticed because of the course. The textbook would show some clean little diagram about preventing cross-contact, and the next night I would see someone set a case of raw chicken on the prep table because the sink area was blocked by a broken cart. The course would talk about cooling rice properly, And I would remember Victor telling Jay to leave a pan uncovered in the walk-in because air needs to get to it, even though we did not have the shallow pans clean. I started taking pictures for myself, not as evidence, just study notes. I would look at the photo after work and compare it to the rule. That sounds strange unless you have worked in a place where bad habits become normal by repetition. You stop seeing the mop bucket near the dry storage because it has always been there. You stop questioning the sticky thermometer because everyone wipes it on a towel. The course made those things visible again. Once I saw them, I could not unsee them. The first photo I saved was of a tub of cut lettuce on the bottom shelf under raw chicken. It was 11:42 on a Sunday night. The lunch crew had over-prepped because a school bus group had canceled, and the walk-in looked like someone had lost a fight with cardboard. I moved the lettuce myself, threw away the top layer, and wrote a note in the closing log. When I mentioned it to Victor the next morning, he waved one hand without looking up from his laptop. "Then move it," he said. I did, but we should probably remind people about storage order. Marcus, I cannot retrain adults every time they put lettuce somewhere dumb. No. I waited for him to write it down. He did not. He clicked his mouse twice and said, "Anything else?" There was always something else. That was the problem. By March, I had a list in the Notes app on my phone. I did not call it anything dramatic. The title was just Store Issues. Under it, I had dates, times, and plain descriptions. Cooler temp 45 degrees at 10:12 p.m. reported to Victor. No service call. Sanitizer test strip reading under range. Bucket still in use. Gloves not changed after trash run. Coached employee. Raw chicken case leaking in walk-in. No spill kit restock. Nothing emotional. Nothing like Victor is a terrible boss. Just what happened. I also kept copies of my punches because our time clock app was unreliable. It was supposed to be simple. You logged in on the tablet by the office, tapped clock in, tapped clock out, and the hours went to payroll. But the tablet froze constantly. Sometimes it threw you back to the home screen. Sometimes it said pending. Sometimes you clocked out at 12:37 a.m., and the app showed 11:58 p.m. the next day. We were told to write corrections on a clipboard if something looked wrong. That clipboard was another one of Victor's little kingdoms. It lived in his office. If he liked you, your correction got approved. If he thought you were asking too many questions, it sat there until payroll closed. So I started taking screenshots. Clock in, clock out, missed punch correction, schedule, pay stub. It was not because I expected a lawsuit. It was because I had learned that when a system makes mistakes, the person with proof has a better week than the person with a memory. The first real conversation with Victor about the list happened on a Tuesday in April, after Ron had come through for a training visit. Ron had watched our lunch rush and corrected 3 things before noon. He replaced a sanitizer bucket. He told Carmen to move the ice scoop. He made me pull a pan of grilled chicken that had been sitting too long, even though we were in the middle of a rush. When Victor came back from whatever errand had kept him away during that visit, Ron had already left. I was in the office finishing the safe count. Victor tossed his keys on the desk and said, "Ron giving you college boy homework again?" I said, "He pointed out some things." Victor said, "Ron points out things because that is Ron's whole personality." I should have let it go. I almost did. Then I thought about my certification, the sign-off, and the fact that I was supposed to be learning how to run a safe kitchen, not how to hide an unsafe one. So I opened my Notes app and said, "Can I show you something?" He said, "Make it quick." I read him the list. Not every item, just the worst ones. Cold hold temperatures, storage order, expired prep labels, sanitizer strength, the mop bucket, the thermometer that would not calibrate, the backhand sink that sometimes had boxes stacked in front of it because the dry truck came late, Victor listened for maybe 20 seconds before he leaned back in his chair. He had a little smile on his face, like I had brought him a school project. "Marcus," he said, "you worry about mopping. I'll worry about the store." I said, "I'm not trying to make trouble." He said, "I know exactly what you're trying to do. You took one class and now you think you're district." I said, "Some of this is basic." He tapped the desk with one finger. "Basic is having enough people to serve customers. Basic is not throwing away product because a kid with a certificate app got nervous. Basic is labor under 24%. I remember looking at the framed franchise award on his wall. It said Operational Excellence. The glass had a fingerprint on it. That small detail stuck in my head because he was lecturing me about basics while the award literally had grease on it. I said, "I just think we should fix it before someone else sees it." His smile disappeared. "Someone else like who?" I said, "Corporate, county, whoever." He said, "Careful. That's how people make themselves look disloyal." That was off-ramp number 1. I gave him the list privately. I gave him a chance to fix it quietly. He chose to make it about loyalty. The next week, my paycheck was wrong. I had worked 47 hours and 18 minutes. I knew because I had covered 2 call-outs, stayed late for inventory, and opened on my day off after Victor texted me at 4:53 in the morning. My pay stub showed exactly 40 hours, no overtime, not 40 point something, not a missed punch. Exactly 40, like the payroll system had taken a ruler to my week. At first, I thought it was an error. That was how naive I still was. I pulled up my screenshots at the kitchen table, lined them next to the pay stub, and did the math twice. Andre was eating cereal across from me at noon because he worked nights at a shipping warehouse and lived on a schedule only bats would understand. He looked at the pay stub and said, "That's not a mistake." I said, "It could be." He said, "Marcus, mistakes don't land on a clean 40. I went in early that afternoon and caught Victor in the office before dinner. He was eating fries out of a nugget box, which is not important except that he used to yell at crew for eating on the line while doing the same thing with the door half closed. I said, "My check is missing 7 hours of overtime." He did not look surprised. He wiped salt off his fingers and clicked around on the payroll screen. "No, it isn't. You were approved for 40. I said, "I worked 47. I have the punches." He said, "You had unapproved overtime." I said, "You asked me to cover those shifts." He said, "I asked you to help. I did not ask you to milk the clock." That line landed harder than I expected. Milk the clock. Like I had stood around stealing from him, not stayed until 1 in the morning pulling chicken from a walk-in that could not hold temperature. I said, "I have your texts." He closed the laptop halfway, and I have the ability to decide what hours were necessary. I said, "That is not how overtime works." He smiled. There he is, food safety expert and payroll attorney. I felt my face get hot. There were a lot of things I wanted to say. I wanted to tell him I knew he had done it because I had embarrassed him with that list. I wanted to tell him stealing 7 hours from someone making shift lead money was pathetic. I wanted to tell him that if labor percentage mattered so much, maybe he should stop scheduling himself for office hours he spent at the smoothie place. But rent was due in 9 days, and my certification sign-off still had his name on it. So I said, "Can you fix it before payroll adjustment closes?" He opened the laptop again. "I'll look at it." I said, "When?" He said, "When I have time." I waited. He looked at the screen until the silence became the answer. He never fixed it. What I did not know yet was that my missing overtime was not the first. It was just the first one that had a spreadsheet attached. The first person who told me was Carmen. It happened during a slow stretch between lunch and dinner, when the lobby was empty, except for one old man nursing a coffee by the window. Carmen came up beside me with a folded pay stub and the careful face people use when they are asking whether something bad is their own fault. The missing time was 3 hours and 14 minutes, all from closing the lobby after a youth hockey team came through at 10:20. The money was not life-changing to Victor, but it mattered to Carmen because she had already spent the money in her head on her son's field trip. When I asked if there had been a missed punch form, Carmen shook their head and said, "He said it was unauthorized." That word kept showing up. Unauthorized. Victor used it like a magic spell. Authorized when he needed someone to stay. Unauthorized when payroll opened. Authorized when the drive-through line was wrapped around the building. Unauthorized when the same person asked why the check was light. With Carmen, she rolled her eyes, but her hands were tight around the paper. That little detail mattered to me because it showed what Victor's system really did. It did not just take time. It made people feel foolish for noticing. The first person who told me was Jay. It happened during a slow stretch between lunch and dinner, when the lobby was empty except for one old man nursing a coffee by the window. Jay came up beside me with a folded pay stub and the careful face people use when they are asking whether something bad is their own fault. The missing time was 2 hours and 40 minutes, all from staying after close to redo prep labels Victor said looked embarrassing. The money was not life-changing to Victor, but it mattered to Jay because his car note had pulled early and left him with $11 until Friday. When I asked if there had been a missed punch form, Jay shook their head and said, "He said it was unauthorized." That word kept showing up. Unauthorized. Victor used it like a magic spell. Authorized when he needed someone to stay. Unauthorized when payroll opened. Authorized when the drive-through line was wrapped around the building. Unauthorized when the same person asked why the check was light. With Jay, he kept his voice low because Victor's office door was cracked. That little detail mattered to me because it showed what Victor's system really did. It did not just take time. It made people feel foolish for noticing. The first person who told me was Nia. It happened during a slow stretch between lunch and dinner, when the lobby was empty except for one old man nursing a coffee by the window. Nia came up beside me with a folded pay stub and the careful face people use when they are asking whether something bad is their own fault. The missing time was 9 hours across 2 checks, all from covering front counter lunches because Victor would not schedule a mid. The money was not life-changing to Victor, but it mattered to Nia because she was too scared to say anything, because she needed her first manager reference. When I asked if there had been a missed punch form, Nia shook their head and said, "He said it was unauthorized." That word kept showing up. Unauthorized. Victor used it like a magic spell. Authorized when he needed someone to stay. Unauthorized when payroll opened. Authorized when the drive-through line was wrapped around the building. Unauthorized when the same person asked why the check was light. With Nia, she asked me 3 times if showing me the stub would get her fired. That little detail mattered to me because it showed what Victor's system really did. It did not just take time. It made people feel foolish for noticing. The first person who told me was Luis. It happened during a slow stretch between lunch and dinner, when the lobby was empty except for one old man nursing a coffee by the window. Luis came up beside me with a folded pay stub and the careful face people use when they are asking whether something bad is their own fault. The missing time was 1 hour and 52 minutes, all from unloading the frozen truck after midnight. The money was not life-changing to Victor, but it mattered to Luis because he laughed at first, then stopped when he saw the pay stub. When I asked if there had been a missed punch form, Luis shook their head and said, "He said it was unauthorized." That word kept showing up. Unauthorized. Victor used it like a magic spell. Authorized when he needed someone to stay. Unauthorized when payroll opened. Authorized when the drive-through line was wrapped around the building. Unauthorized when the same person asked why the check was light. With Luis, he stared at the edit like it was a magic trick with rent money inside it. That little detail mattered to me because it showed what Victor's system really did. It did not just take time. It made people feel foolish for noticing. The first person who told me was Brooke. It happened during a slow stretch between lunch and dinner, when the lobby was empty except for one old man nursing a coffee by the window. Brooke came up beside me with a folded pay stub and the careful face people use when they are asking whether something bad is their own fault. The missing time was 1 hour and 20 minutes, all from staying late to clean a lobby spill after a birthday group left frosting on the tables. The money was not life-changing to Victor, but it mattered to Brooke because she was new and thought managers could round shifts down whenever they wanted. When I asked if there had been a missed punch form, Brooke shook their head and said, "He said it was unauthorized." That word kept showing up. Unauthorized. Victor used it like a magic spell. Authorized when he needed someone to stay. Unauthorized when payroll opened. Authorized when the drive-through line was wrapped around the building. Unauthorized when the same person asked why the check was light. With Brooke, she kept apologizing for not understanding the app. That little detail mattered to me because it showed what Victor's system really did. It did not just take time. It made people feel foolish for noticing. The first person who told me was Eli. It happened during a slow stretch between lunch and dinner, when the lobby was empty except for one old man nursing a coffee by the window. Eli came up beside me with a folded pay stub and the careful face people use when they are asking whether something bad is their own fault. The missing time was 48 minutes, all from finishing trash and cardboard after the closing checklist was already signed. The money was not life-changing to Victor, but it mattered to Eli because it was not much money, which was exactly why Victor thought nobody would chase it. When I asked if there had been a missed punch form, Eli shook their head and said, "He said it was unauthorized." That word kept showing up. Unauthorized. Victor used it like a magic spell. Authorized when he needed someone to stay. Unauthorized when payroll opened. Authorized when the drive-through line was wrapped around the building. Unauthorized when the same person asked why the check was light. With Eli, he said the amount was too small to complain about, and then looked ashamed for saying it. That little detail mattered to me because it showed what Victor's system really did. It did not just take time. It made people feel foolish for noticing. I started paying attention to patterns, not just my hours. Everyone's. I did not ask people to hand me pay stubs at first because that felt too big, and honestly, I was scared. Instead, I listened. I watched who got called in. I watched who stayed late. I watched who came in 2 days later with that small, confused look at the time clock, tapping the screen like the missing money might appear if they pressed hard enough. Victor targeted the same group every time. Young workers, people with first jobs, people whose English was good but not confident, people who avoided conflict. Nia was the worst case because she believed managers by default. If Victor said overtime had to be pre-approved to be paid, she believed him. She had grown up hearing that a job was a privilege. Victor heard that too, and he used it like a key. 2 Fridays after my short check, I watched him do it in real time. Nia had stayed late because the closing driver called out and the lobby was trashed after a softball team came in. She was scrubbing syrup off the soda station at 12:19 a.m. Victor had left at 9. The next Monday, when she checked the app, her clock out showed 11 p.m. exactly. "Did you forget to clock out?" I asked. She looked embarrassed. "I don't think so." I said, "What time did you leave?" She said, "Like 12:30. You were here." I said, "I was." She lowered her voice. "Can they change it if they think you were too slow?" That question made me angrier than Victor's joke had. Not because she asked it, because he had made the question seem reasonable. I told her, "No. If you worked, you get paid." She glanced at the office door. "Victor said closing shouldn't take that long." I said, "Victor went home before the trash was pulled." She said, "He said if I bring it up again, he might have to cut me because my availability is too limited." There it was. Not just theft. Leverage. I tried the normal way again. That is the part I want people to understand. I did not wake up one morning and decide to burn my boss down. I tried to solve it like a decent employee. I printed my screenshots, highlighted the punches, attached the pay stub, and put everything in a folder. I asked Victor for 10 minutes before my shift. He sighed like I had asked him to rebuild the freezer with his bare hands. "You're still on this?" he said. I said, "It is not just me." That was my mistake. His head came up. "Who else?" I said, "I'm saying the time edits are confusing people." He said, "People talk too much." I said, "People are missing pay." He leaned back. "Careful, Marcus. You start organizing little complaints. You become the complaint." I had never heard him say anything that direct before. He was not even pretending it was about policy now. He was telling me the role he had assigned me in his head. Complaint. Problem. Kid who forgot his place. I said, "I just want my overtime corrected." He picked up my highlighted screenshots, flipped through them, and laughed once through his nose. "You know what your problem is? You think paperwork makes you powerful." Then he slid the pages back across the desk. "Paperwork makes you annoying." That became the second line I saved in my head. The next schedule came out Sunday night. My hours dropped from 38 to 22. No explanation. 2 of my closing shifts went to a new hire who had been there 3 weeks. My Saturday open disappeared. The notes section said labor alignment, which is manager language for "I did this and would like it to sound like math." I texted Victor, "Did my availability get changed?" He replied 9 minutes later, "No, need stronger team players on key shifts." I wrote, "Is this because I asked about pay?" He wrote, "It's because you need to focus on basics." Then, after a pause, he sent, "Also not comfortable signing off cert hours until I see better judgment." I sat on the edge of my bed with that message on the screen. Andre was in the living room watching a basketball game with the volume low. The apartment smelled like microwaved rice and laundry detergent. I remember that because everything around me was so normal while my stomach was turning itself inside out. 22 hours meant I could pay rent but not much else. It meant the certification fee I had saved for would have to wait. It meant telling my mom I could not help with her insurance that month. The sign-off threat was worse. Money was immediate, but the certificate was the thing I was trying to use to leave. Victor had put one hand on my paycheck and the other on the door out. I nearly quit. I really did. There is no noble version of that moment. I opened the job app on my phone and started scrolling. Warehouse picker. Gas station night clerk. Dishwasher at a retirement home. I told myself anything would be better. Then I thought about Nia asking if managers could change time if they thought you were too slow, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not bravery, not yet. More like exhaustion turning into shape. The next night, after close, I found Nia sitting on an upside-down pickle bucket in dry storage, crying quietly into a paper towel. She tried to stand up when she saw me, like crying was another rule violation. "I'm fine," she said. I said, "No, you're not." She said, "Please don't tell Victor." I said, "I won't." She looked at the floor. My check was short again. My mom thinks I'm lying about my hours. That was the lowest point for me. Not my hours. Not the certificate. That. A 19-year-old trying to convince her mother she was not lying because a grown man in an office had discovered he could steal from the quiet ones. I sat on a flower bucket across from her and said, "If I do something about this, would you tell the truth if somebody official asks?" She wiped her face. "Like who?" I said, "Corporate, Labor Department, I don't know yet." Her first answer was silence. I did not push. I knew what I was asking. Victor controlled her hours. Victor controlled her reference. Victor controlled whether every shift felt like walking into a room where your name had just been said. So I waited. Finally, she said, "I don't want to be the reason everyone gets in trouble." I said, "You're not." She said, "He'll know." I said, "Maybe." She said, "Will you be there?" I said, "Yes." She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded once. "Okay. If they ask me, I'll tell them." That was the moment I stopped trying to convince Victor. I had already given him 2 off-ramps. He had laughed at one and threatened me after the other. After that, I stopped arguing and started assembling. My first rule was simple. I would only document what I could prove. No gossip, no guesses, no dramatic language. If I wrote down that the walk-in was at 46 degrees, I took a photo of the thermometer and wrote the time. If I wrote down that a punch had been edited, I saved the original screenshot and the changed time. If someone told me their check was short, I asked if they were comfortable showing me the pay stub, and if they were not, I let it go. The point was not to build the angriest folder, it was to build the cleanest one. I bought a black composition notebook from the dollar store and a pack of pens that clipped inside the cover. I did not bring a binder because binders look like evidence. A notebook looks like homework, and I was already the food safety kid. I wrote dates in the left margin. I numbered each item. I left blank lines so I could add follow-up notes later. The first page said, "Store observations, April through May. Boring on purpose." Ron had told me boring meant someone had been sued. I took that seriously. On April 18th, I logged the walk-in cooler. The fact was plain. The digital display read 45.8 degrees at 9:36 p.m. The risk was just as plain. 2 pans of diced tomatoes and a tray of grilled chicken were still being used. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, Victor texted back, "Use your judgment. Don't waste product." Then I wrote what happened next. I moved what I could into the backup reach-in and marked the rest for discard review. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On April 20th, I logged the 3-compartment sink. The fact was plain. The sanitizer strip barely changed color. The risk was just as plain. Carmen had been told to keep wiping trays during the rush. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, Victor said, "Change it after the line dies." Then I wrote what happened next. I mixed a new bucket and taped the weak strip into my notebook. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On April 23rd, I logged the dry storage. The fact was plain. A gray mop bucket sat 6 inches from open boxes of cups. The risk was just as plain. The utility closet was blocked by a broken delivery cart. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response, if he gave one. For that entry, Victor wrote cart repair later on the whiteboard and never called it in. Then I wrote what happened next. I took a photo before moving the bucket because it had been there 3 nights in a row. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On April 26th, I logged the prep table. The fact was plain. Raw chicken tongs were laid beside the lettuce bin. The risk was just as plain. A new hire had switched tasks without changing gloves. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, I corrected him and wrote the coaching down. Then I wrote what happened next. The employee thanked me because nobody had explained why the color-coded handles mattered. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On April 29th, I logged the ice machine. The fact was plain. The scoop was sitting handle down on top of the machine. The risk was just as plain. The holder had cracked and fallen behind the soda rack. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, Victor said a replacement was not in budget this week. Then I wrote what happened next. I put the scoop in a clean Cambro and wrote that the holder needed replacement. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On May 2nd, I logged the backhand sink. The fact was plain. 2 boxes of lids blocked the basin. The risk was just as plain. The dry truck had arrived during dinner with no manager to receive it. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, I moved them and took a photo of the blocked sink first. Then I wrote what happened next. Jay watched me and said, "You know he is going to hate that picture." That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On May 5th, I logged the hot hold cabinet. The fact was plain. 4 pans had expired discard times. The risk was just as plain. Victor told Jay to relabel them because lunch waste was high. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, Jay refused to initial the new label. Then I wrote what happened next. I pulled the pans and logged the waste even though Victor glared from the office. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them, and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On May 7th, I logged the thermometer station. The fact was plain: the probe thermometer would not calibrate in ice water. The risk was just as plain: we had no backup in the drawer. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response, if he gave one. For that entry, Victor said, "Then use common sense until Monday." Then I wrote what happened next. I wrote that common sense was not a measuring device, and then crossed that sentence out before anyone saw it. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them, and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On May 10th, I logged the walk-in floor. The fact was plain: pink liquid from a chicken case had pooled under the shelf. The risk was just as plain: the spill kit was empty except for gloves. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, Luis and I cleaned it and photographed the empty kit. Then I wrote what happened next. I added the missing absorbent pads to the supply order and watched Victor delete them later. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them, and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On May 12th, I logged the lobby drink station. The fact was plain: fruit flies were around the drain grate. The risk was just as plain: the drain brush had been missing for 2 weeks. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, Victor blamed closing crew and cut 10 minutes from closing labor. Then I wrote what happened next. Carmen said the flies were the only guests getting free refills. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them, and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On May 14th, I logged the freezer door. The fact was plain: ice had built up along the threshold. The risk was just as plain: boxes were being dragged over it and splitting open. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, Victor said delivery crew needed to be more careful. Then I wrote what happened next. I photographed the torn box and the ice ridge because careful people still slip on frozen floors. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them, and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On May 16th, I logged the employee hand sink. The fact was plain. The soap dispenser was empty after dinner rush. The risk was just as plain. The backup soap was locked in Victor's office. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, Victor had gone home with the key. Then I wrote what happened next. I bought soap from the gas station next door and kept the receipt. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On May 17th, I logged the prep cooler. The fact was plain. Sliced cheese was above the fill line and sitting too warm. The risk was just as plain. The lunch lead said Victor told her to overfill it to save trips. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, Victor called it a training preference. Then I wrote what happened next. I reduced the level and logged the temperature before and after. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them, and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On May 18th, I logged the chemical shelf. The fact was plain. Spray bottles had faded labels. The risk was just as plain. A new hire could not tell degreaser from glass cleaner. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, Victor said labels were cosmetic. Then I wrote what happened next. I relabeled them and wrote the old labels were illegible. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. On May 21st, I logged the closing checklist. The fact was plain. The form showed the lobby checked at 10:30 even though customers were still seated. The risk was just as plain. Victor had pre-signed the sheet before leaving. I did not write a speech about it. I wrote the time, the people present, the corrective action I took if I could take one, and Victor's response if he gave one. For that entry, he said it was efficient to get paperwork out of the way. Then I wrote what happened next. I wrote the actual closing time beside my initials. That second line mattered because the log was not just a list of bad conditions. It showed that the crew kept trying to correct them and that the corrections kept running into the same wall. Every time I made an entry, I felt ridiculous for about 5 minutes. Then something else would happen, and the ridiculous feeling would leave. Documentation looks paranoid until the person in charge starts changing the story. Then it looks like memory with receipts. The wage folder was separate. I did not mix food safety and payroll because I knew they were different issues. Food safety belonged to Corporate Quality Assurance and the County Health Department. Pay belonged to payroll and the State Labor Department. Victor had made them feel connected because his retaliation touched both, but I wanted the paper trail clean enough that nobody could say I was throwing everything at the wall because I was mad about my schedule. For my own hours, I had everything. the schedule showing 41 planned hours, Victor's texts asking me to cover, screenshots of clock in and clock out confirmations, the payroll detail showing edits, the pay stub showing exactly 40. I put those in order by date. Then I made a one-page summary with columns: date, scheduled, actual punch, edited punch, difference, note. I hated how much I enjoyed making that spreadsheet. Competence can feel petty when you have been powerless for too long. For everyone else, I move slower. I did not want to pressure anyone. I told Carmen first because she had the least fear of Victor and the most talent for saying what everyone else was thinking. She looked at the spreadsheet on my phone and said, "Oh, we're doing math revenge." I said, "We're doing accurate records." She said, "That is what I said, math revenge." I asked, "Can I use your hours if I keep your name out until someone official asks?" She stared toward the office window. "Use them. And when somebody official asks, use my name. I'm tired." Jay gave me 2 pay stubs and a warning. "He'll make you the villain," he said. "You know that, right?" I said. "He already did." He said, "No. I mean with everybody. He'll say you got corporate sniffing around and now hours are cut because of you." I said, "Maybe." He said, "Just be ready. People hate the person who points at the leak more than the leak." He was right. That is another thing these stories do not always show. Doing the right thing does not make everyone clap. Sometimes it makes people nervous because they know the roof has been leaking for years. And if you point it out, now someone might close the building. The person I did not expect help from was Ron. I did not call him at first. I did not even have his number saved. But he came through in early May for a regional training day at another store and stopped by ours to pick up supplies. Victor was out. I was on a break behind the building, sitting on an upside-down milk crate near the dumpster, eating a chicken sandwich I had made too fast to enjoy. Ron came out carrying a box of laminated training cards. He looked at my notebook, then at me. "You still taking that course?" I said, "Trying." He said, "That answer sounds like a story." I closed the notebook. "Store's been rough." He waited. Ron was good at waiting. Managers hate silence because they are used to filling it with instructions. Trainers know silence is where people decide whether to tell the truth. I said, "If I had concerns about food safety, who am I supposed to go to if my GM already knows?" Ron did not react much, but his eyes moved to the back door. "Depends on the concern," I said. "Cold holding, cross-contamination, sanitizer, time labels, stuff from the course." He asked, "How many times have you raised it?" I said, "Enough." He asked, "Documented?" I said, "Some." He said, "Good." Then he lowered his voice. "There is a routine corporate audit in a few weeks. They rotate stores every quarter. Victor knows the window, not the day." I looked at him. "Are you telling me to report it?" He said, "I'm telling you audits work better when auditors see normal operations, not theater." I said, "That sounds like a yes." He said, "That sounds like I still work for the company. Use the official channels. Be factual. Do not exaggerate. And Marcus?" I said, "Yeah?" He said, "Do not warn Victor again." That sentence changed the shape of the whole thing. Until then, a part of me still wanted the clean movie version where I confronted Victor with enough proof, and he suddenly became reasonable because the evidence was undeniable. Ron had been around too long to believe in that version. He knew Victor would not fix the problem. He would fix the appearance of the problem. There is a difference. The audit became step 2. Not a surprise inspection I invented. Not a trap from nowhere. A routine corporate audit that already existed, with auditors who were supposed to check the same things I had been logging. My job was to make sure they saw the real store. That did not mean sabotaging anything. I need that clear. I did not hide sanitizer strips. I did not move raw chicken. I did not block sinks or break thermometers. Victor had already built the unsafe store. I just stopped cleaning up the evidence before people with clipboards arrived. If I saw an immediate danger, I corrected it because customers were not pawns in my argument. But I photographed first, logged it, and saved the response. I also emailed corporate quality through the employee portal. The message took me 40 minutes because I kept rewriting it to sound less angry. The final version was boring enough to frame. It said I was a shift lead at Store 417. It said I was enrolled in food safety certification. It said I had repeatedly observed issues with cold holding, storage order, sanitizer strength, blocked hand sinks, and time label controls during closing and transition shifts. It said I had raised these concerns with the general manager on April 9th and April 22nd. It said I was concerned that audit preparation might not reflect normal operating conditions. It did not call Victor a thief. It did not mention my schedule. It stayed in its lane. When I hit send, my hands shook so badly I had to put the phone down. Then I took a screenshot of the confirmation page and added it to the folder. The wage complaint was step 3, and it scared me more. Reporting food safety felt like reporting a store problem. Reporting wages felt like accusing a man by name. The State Labor Department website had a form for unpaid wages and altered time records. It asked for employer information, dates, amount owed, manager name, and whether other employees might be affected. It also asked if I feared retaliation. I stared at that checkbox for a long time. Then Victor posted another schedule with me at 18 hours. The note beside my name said, Performance Focus. Nia had 12 hours. Carmen had 21. The new hires who never questioned edits had almost full-time schedules. I looked at that schedule and remembered Victor saying paperwork made me annoying. I checked the retaliation box. The complaint took an hour and a half. I uploaded my screenshots, pay stub, schedule, and the summary spreadsheet. For other employees, I wrote that I had reason to believe similar edits had occurred and that employees could provide records if contacted. I did not upload anyone else's documents without permission. When the form asked what I wanted, I wrote, payment of unpaid overtime, correction of records, and protection from retaliation. It felt too small when I submitted it. A web form, a confirmation number, no music, no dramatic thunder, just a white screen saying the complaint had been received. I saved the PDF and sat there in my bedroom while Andre knocked once and opened the door. He asked, "You good?" I said, "I think I just filed a labor complaint." He said, "You think?" I said, "I did." He leaned against the doorframe. "Then eat something. Revolution on an empty stomach is bad planning." That made me laugh for the first time in days. The next few days were a string of close calls, and the first one was about photos. Victor knew something had changed before he knew what it was. Bad managers can miss a leaking cooler for 6 weeks and still sense when people stop fearing them in the same way. In that scene, he stood behind me while I logged the prep cooler temperature and said I was creating a hostile environment with my phone. I felt the old fear rise up, but it did not have as much room anymore. Fear needs uncertainty to grow. Documentation had taken some of that away. What mattered was what happened after. I asked him to send me the no-photo policy, and he told me not to get cute. I wrote the date, the time, and the exact words as soon as I could. I did not try to make him sound worse. I did not have to. Victor kept offering clean sentences because he thought the room still belonged to him. He did not understand that every clean sentence was a handle someone else could pick up later. The next few days were a string of close calls, and the first one was about the office recording. Victor knew something had changed before he knew what it was. Bad managers can miss a leaking cooler for 6 weeks and still sense when people stop fearing them in the same way. In that scene, He closed the office door and said my certification sign-off depended on leadership maturity. I felt the old fear rise up, but it did not have as much room anymore. Fear needs uncertainty to grow. Documentation had taken some of that away. What mattered was what happened after. I asked what leadership maturity looked like and let him explain himself into the sentence I needed. I wrote the date, the time, and the exact words as soon as I could. I did not try to make him sound worse. I did not have to. Victor kept offering clean sentences because he thought the room still belonged to him. He did not understand that every clean sentence was a handle someone else could pick up later. The next few days were a string of close calls, and the first one was about Nia's doubts. Victor knew something had changed before he knew what it was. Bad managers can miss a leaking cooler for 6 weeks and still sense when people stop fearing them in the same way. In that scene, she waited by the dumpster after close with her keys digging into her palm. I felt the old fear rise up, but it did not have as much room anymore. Fear needs uncertainty to grow. Documentation had taken some of that away. What mattered was what happened after. She said Victor had asked whether I was making people send pay stubs, and I told her suspicion was not proof. I wrote the date, the time, and the exact words as soon as I could. I did not try to make him sound worse. I did not have to. Victor kept offering clean sentences because he thought the room still belonged to him. He did not understand that every clean sentence was a handle someone else could pick up later. The next few days were a string of close calls, and the first one was about the May 19th meeting. Victor knew something had changed before he knew what it was. Bad managers can miss a leaking cooler for 6 weeks and still sense when people stop fearing them in the same way. In that scene, he made everyone sign a sheet saying overtime had to be authorized. I felt the old fear rise up, but it did not have as much room anymore. Fear needs uncertainty to grow. Documentation had taken some of that away. What mattered was what happened after. Carmen asked whether work still had to be paid, and Victor called that a word game. I wrote the date, the time, and the exact words as soon as I could. I did not try to make him sound worse. I did not have to. Victor kept offering clean sentences because he thought the room still belonged to him. He did not understand that every clean sentence was a handle someone else could pick up later. The next few days were a string of close calls, and the first one was about the walk-in spike. Victor knew something had changed before he knew what it was. Bad managers can miss a leaking cooler for 6 weeks and still sense when people stop fearing them in the same way. In that scene, the cooler hit 47 degrees while Victor was at home. I felt the old fear rise up, but it did not have as much room anymore. Fear needs uncertainty to grow. Documentation had taken some of that away. What mattered was what happened after. He told me to stop opening the door and document myself cleaning the lobby. I wrote the date, the time, and the exact words as soon as I could. I did not try to make him sound worse. I did not have to. Victor kept offering clean sentences because he thought the room still belonged to him. He did not understand that every clean sentence was a handle someone else could pick up later. Nia almost backed out 2 days later. She caught me by the dumpster after close, twisting her car keys in her hand. "Maybe we should just wait," she said. I asked, "For what?" She said, "I don't know. For him to stop." I looked at the back door, at the grease stains on the concrete, at the little pile of cigarette butts Victor pretended not to see during inspections. "Nia," I said, "he is not going to stop while stopping costs him money." She started crying again, but this time she was angry too. "I hate that he can make me feel stupid for wanting my own check." I said, "You're not stupid." She asked, "Then why do I feel like I did something wrong?" I said, "Because he is good at his job when the job is making people smaller." She laughed once, even though she was crying. Then she opened her phone and showed me her screenshots. Clock out 12:28. Edited to 11 o'clock. clock out 12:11. Edited to 10:45. A missed punch correction denied with the note. Closing delay unauthorized. I asked if she wanted me to include them in the wage complaint if the investigator followed up. She nodded. Say it out loud, I said. She asked, why? I said, so you know you're choosing it. She wiped her face. If someone official asks, they can use my records. I said, okay. She said, and Marcus? I said, yeah? She said, don't quit before they come. That was the line that kept me there. Corporate Quality replied on a Monday afternoon. The email was short. Thank you for your report. Your concerns have been routed to the regional operations and quality assurance teams. Please preserve any documentation and continue to follow food safety policy. Do not interfere with store operations or audit procedures. I read that last sentence 4 times. Do not interfere. That was fair. It also told me the audit was real enough that someone wanted the process clean. The Labor Department sent a confirmation letter 2 days later. It said a wage claim specialist had been assigned and that the employer might be contacted for payroll records. It also said retaliation for filing a wage complaint was prohibited. I printed that sentence and put it in the folder, because sometimes you need to see a rule in black ink before you believe it applies to you. Victor, meanwhile, kept digging. That is the thing about arrogant people. They do not stop when the ground starts to loosen. They stomp harder because they think noise is control. The audit came on a Thursday because of course it did. Thursdays were our bad days. The truck came Wednesday nights, which meant dry storage was always crowded. Victor usually opened Thursdays, but he had switched with the assistant manager so he could attend what he called a vendor breakfast. I later learned the vendor breakfast was a golf event 40 minutes away. That one was almost funny. I opened at 5 with Brooke and Jay. By 6:30, the drive-thru was full. By 7:15, we were down a person because Brooke got sick and went home. By 8, the walk-in display was flirting with 44 degrees again. I logged it and moved the most sensitive product. I did not know the auditors were coming. I knew the window was sometime that month, but not the day. That mattered because if I had known, Victor would later have claimed I staged the morning. Instead, the morning staged itself. At 8:52, 2 women walked into the lobby and ordered black coffees. They did not introduce themselves right away. They sat near the window and watched the counter for 10 minutes. One had a laptop bag. The other had a tablet. I noticed because they were not looking at the menu, and people who order black coffee at a fast food place usually want either caffeine or free Wi-Fi, not a view of the prep line. At 9:04, the taller one came to the counter and asked for the manager on duty. I wiped my hands, stepped over, and said, "That's me until Victor gets in." She showed me a badge. "I'm Dana Ellis with Corporate Quality Assurance. This is Priya Nandakumar from Operations Compliance. We're here for a scheduled store audit." My mouth went dry, not because I was surprised exactly, because the thing I had been waiting for was suddenly standing in front of me in a navy jacket. I said, "Okay. What do you need from me?" Dana looked at the line, then at the kitchen. "First, keep operating normally. Do not stop service unless we direct you. We will observe, then we will ask for records." I said, "Understood." Priya asked, "Is the general manager on site?" I said, "No, he's scheduled later. I can call him." Dana said, "Please do, after we complete initial observations." That was the first sign corporate already knew what Victor's theater looked like. They did not want him sprinting in ahead of them, moving buckets and relabeling pans. They wanted the store as it was. For the next 40 minutes, I ran the shift while they watched. That was harder than any confrontation. It is one thing to document a problem alone at midnight. It is another to keep serving customers while 2 auditors silently confirm the store is exactly as bad as you said. Every beep sounded louder. Every glove change felt like a test. Every time Jay reached for something, I prayed he would remember the thing we had coached the week before. The violations appeared one by one, not because anyone created them, but because systems reveal themselves under pressure. The sanitizer bucket at front counter tested weak. The backup thermometer did not read correctly. A pan in hot hold had a label that looked altered. The walk-in was above range. The ice scoop holder was still broken. The backhand sink had a sleeve of cups beside it. Dana photographed each item. Priya asked who had been notified. I answered with dates. You know the dates? Priya asked. I said, I have a log. She looked at me for a second. We'll ask for that after observation. At 9:17, the fryer alarm went off, and Victor walked in with his coffee. The hook caught up with the story right there. He tried charm first. Victor always tried charm when he did not know how much someone knew. He shook Dana's hand too hard and apologized for not being there to greet them. He said Thursdays were delivery recovery days. He said the store had a young team. He said Marcus is very enthusiastic about food safety, which was his way of making me sound like a kid with a hobby instead of the shift lead who had been warning him for 6 weeks. Dana did not smile. We are going to continue the walk. Please do not coach employees during observation. Victor's eyebrows lifted. I would not coach during an audit. Carmen from drive-thru made a tiny sound that might have been a cough if you were generous. The first real hit came at the walk-in. Dana opened the door, waited for the display to settle, then wrote down the number. 45.6. Victor leaned around her shoulder. Door's been open all morning, he said. Priya said, we have been observing door activity since 9:04. It does not account for this variance. Do you have service records? Victor looked at me. Marcus handles the maintenance log on shift. That was a lie. Maintenance was Victor's responsibility, but I had expected him to hand me anything that was on fire. I said, I can show the temperature log and the texts I sent about the cooler. I do not have service call authority. Dana turned to Victor. Who has service call authority? Victor took a sip of coffee he absolutely did not need. I do. Dana asked, when was the last call placed? He looked at the ceiling like the answer might be taped there. I would have to check. Dana said, please do. He checked. There had been no service call. That was when his confidence slipped for the first time. Not gone, just dented. He started using phrases like isolated miss and coaching opportunity. Priya wrote them down. Every time he said something was isolated, Dana asked for the record that showed it had been corrected. Every time he said it was a coaching opportunity, Priya asked who was coached and when. Victor was used to talking in fog. They kept asking for street addresses. Then Dana asked for my log. Victor's head snapped toward me. What log? I said, store observations. He said, you have a personal log of store operations? Dana said, Mr. Lane, please allow him to answer. Victor said, I'm just asking why an hourly shift lead is keeping unauthorized records. Priya looked up from her tablet. Unauthorized by whom? That question landed beautifully because Victor had no answer that did not sound exactly like what it was. Unauthorized by the manager who did not want records. I went to my backpack, pulled out the black composition notebook, and handed it to Dana. My hand shook a little. She noticed but did not comment. She flipped to the first page, then the second, then the tabs I had made with little pieces of receipt tape. Priya came to stand beside her. The store kept operating around us. Fries dropped. A customer complained about no ketchup packets. The headset chirped, and in the middle of all that ordinary noise, 2 corporate auditors read the same list Victor had laughed at. Dana stopped at April 18th. Walk-in 45.8. Text to GM. Use your judgment. Don't waste product. Do you have that text? I said, yes. Victor said, That is out of context. Priya asked, "What is the context?" He said, "We were in a rush." Priya asked, "Food temperature requirements change during a rush?" Victor opened his mouth, closed it. No. That was the first quiet moment. Not the big one, not yet, but a small preview, the kind where a person hears their own excuse and realizes it does not sound better out loud. They moved through the notebook. April 20th sanitizer, April 23rd mop bucket, April 29th ice scoop, May 5th relabeled hot hold pans, May 7th thermometer, May 10th leaking chicken case. Every item had a photo. Every photo had a time. Some had texts. Some had witness names. None of it was dramatic. That was why it worked. Victor started sweating around his hairline. He took off his sunglasses and put them on the prep shelf, then seemed to realize that was not food safe, and grabbed them again. It was a tiny thing, but Priya saw it. She did not write it down. She did not have to. By then, the pattern was already standing in the room. At 10:08, Dana told us to stop using the walk-in for temperature-sensitive product until maintenance evaluated it. At 10:16, Priya called the district manager. At 10:22, Victor stepped into the office and shut the door. Through the window, I saw him pacing with his phone to his ear. Carmen leaned toward me without looking away from the drive-through screen. "Math revenge has entered the building," I whispered. "Food safety revenge." She said, "Same spreadsheet, different sauce." I almost laughed, which would have been a terrible idea because my stomach was still somewhere near my shoes. The district manager, Elaine Porter, arrived at 10:54. I had met her twice. She was the kind of manager who wore plain flats and walked faster than everyone else. Ron arrived 10 minutes after her, not as the decision-maker, but as training support. He did not look at me at first. He looked at the line, the walk-in tag, the auditors, and Victor's office. Then he gave me one small nod. Victor came out with Elaine talking too fast. "I have been asking for cooler service," he said. "We have had staffing challenges. Marcus is ambitious but inexperienced, and I think some routine coaching notes have been misunderstood." Elaine said, "Victor, stop." He stopped. "We are going to review the findings in the lobby office. Dana, Priya, Ron, Marcus, join us." Victor said, "Marcus?" Elaine looked at him. "Yes, Marcus." The lobby office was not really an office. It was a small meeting room near the front, used for interviews and online training. The table wobbled. The air conditioner above it clicked every few seconds. There were 5 chairs and one faded poster about guest recovery. Victor sat at the head of the table before anyone told him to, then seemed to realize that made him look too comfortable and shifted sideways. Dana laid out the audit findings. She did not use adjectives. She did not say disgusting or negligent or unsafe. She said critical temperature control failure. She said improper chemical concentration. She said blocked hand washing access. She said inadequate corrective action documentation. She said repeated management awareness without service escalation. Every phrase was worse than an insult because it was useful. Victor kept trying to turn each item into a person. The cooler was Marcus not calling service. The sanitizer was Carmen rushing. The labels were Jay misunderstanding discard times. The blocked sink was delivery crew. The mop bucket was closing staff. He spread blame like butter, thin and everywhere. Then Ron spoke for the first time. "I coached this store on sanitizer, storage order, and discard labeling during my April visit," he said. I also advised Victor afterward that follow-up was needed. Victor stared at him. "You did not say it like that." Ron folded his hands on the table. "I have the visit summary." There are few sounds more satisfying than paper sliding out of a folder at exactly the right time. Ron's visit summary was only 2 pages, but it hit like a brick. It showed the same issues. It showed Victor had been warned before I ever brought him my list. It showed this was not a 20-year-old shift lead misunderstanding the textbook. Elaine read the summary without changing expression. Then she looked at Victor. Why was there no corrective action plan? Victor said, We corrected issues in the moment. Elaine asked, Why was there no documented plan? He said, We were short-staffed. She asked, Why was the cooler not serviced? He said, It was intermittent. She asked, Why was product held in it after repeated high readings? He did not answer that one. Then the wage issue walked into the room from a direction Victor did not expect. Elaine's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it, frowned, and stepped out. Through the glass, I saw her answer. Her posture changed while she listened. Not dramatically. Just enough that Ron glanced at Dana, and Dana stopped writing. When Elaine came back, she closed the door behind her. Victor, she said, corporate payroll received a state inquiry this morning regarding edited time records at this location. We are going to need to preserve all payroll records, schedules, time edits, and manager notes. Effective immediately, you are not to access or modify time records without HR present. For the first time that day, Victor looked genuinely lost. A state inquiry? He said. Elaine said, Yes. He asked, About what? She said, Unpaid overtime and altered punch records. He said, That is separate from this. Elaine's voice stayed flat. It may be. It may not be. We will preserve records either way. He looked at me. Not a glance. A stare. That was when he started to connect the rooms. Food safety in one hand, payroll in the other. The list he mocked and the overtime he shaved were no longer separate problems he could manage one at a time. They were two doors into the same office. Marcus, he said, and there was something ugly under it. Did you file something? Elaine turned her head. Do not question employees about protected activity in this meeting. He said, I'm asking because this is coordinated. Elaine said, sharper now, Victor, stop talking. He did. Not because he wanted to, because 3 corporate people, 1 trainer and the shift lead he had cut down to 18 hours were all watching him, and for once, his office window was not enough to make him powerful. The store was temporarily closed at 11:42 a.m., not because of one dramatic violation, because of the stack. The cooler needed service, product needed to be discarded. Sanitizer procedures needed retraining. The hand sink access and storage needed to be reset. Equipment had to be checked. Dana put a printed notice on the lobby door while customers stood outside confused, trying to pull a locked handle under the big red logo. I watched Victor watch the door. That store was his kingdom. Not because he owned it, but because everyone inside it had been trained to move around his moods. Seeing the door locked by someone above him did something to his face. It made him look smaller than the office had ever let him look. We spent the next 2 hours under corporate direction. Product got discarded. The cooler company got called for emergency service. Ron retrained everyone on storage order and sanitizer, including me, because the point was not to pretend I was perfect. The point was to make the store safe. Carmen made a joke about finally seeing a mop bucket in the correct habitat. Nobody laughed loudly, but everyone wanted to. Victor was told to stay in the lobby office and pull records with Elaine. That was a beautiful sentence. Pull records. The man who had spent months treating records like his personal clay was now sitting under supervision while payroll exported them. At 1:30, HR joined by video call. At 1:47, the franchise owner arrived. His name was Mr. Patel, and I had only seen him in person twice. He usually communicated through district updates and holiday thank you cards with printed signatures. That day, he walked in with no smile and went straight to the lobby office. The rest of us pretended not to watch. We watched. The payroll export showed edit codes. That was the part Victor either forgot or never understood. He thought changing a punch made the old punch disappear. It did not. The system kept audit trails. Manager ID date, time, original punch, edited punch, reason code. Some edits had notes. Some did not. A few had the same phrase copied across employees. Unauthorized closing delay. When HR asked for the authorization policy, Victor produced the meeting sheet we had signed. Carmen's eyebrows went up from across the line. I could see her wanting to say something. She did not have to. HR asked when the sheet was issued. May 19th. Then they asked why punches had been edited in April and early May, using the same unauthorized rationale before the written reminder existed. Victor said the policy had always been understood. HR asked where employees had acknowledged it before May 19th. Victor said it was common practice. HR asked if common practice allowed the company to not pay recorded work time. Victor said, "I think we are getting too technical." That line traveled through the store in under 5 minutes. By mid-afternoon, the issue had grown beyond my missing 7 hours. Payroll pulled 60 days of records for closing crew, shift leads, and anyone with edited punches. The first pass found 18 employees with downward edits. Not every edit was illegal. Some were real corrections. Some had employee initials. Some were mistakes in the other direction. But enough were wrong that HR stopped calling it a review and started calling it an internal investigation. Nia was asked to speak with HR privately. She looked like she might throw up. I was not allowed in the room, which was proper. But I stood near the drink station where she could see me when she walked past. She held her phone in both hands. When the door closed behind her, Victor stared at the tabletop. She was in there for 28 minutes. When she came out, her eyes were red, but her shoulders were different. Not relaxed, not happy, just no longer folded inward. She walked past me and whispered, "I told them." I said, "Good." She said, "I gave them the screenshots." I said, "Good." She said, "They asked if I was scared of retaliation." I asked, "What did you say?" She looked toward the office. I said yes. That was the moment I knew Victor was done. Maybe not fired yet. Maybe not that hour. But done in the way a bridge is done when the crack reaches the support. People might still be standing on it, but the failure has already happened. The understanding moment did not arrive with shouting. It arrived with a printer. At 3:12 p.m., the little printer in the lobby office started spitting out pages. Not receipts. Full sheets, payroll reports, audit findings, corrective action forms. Victor sat at the table with his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were pale. Elaine stood behind the laptop. Mr. Patel was on the phone with someone from corporate legal. Dana and Priya had gone back to the kitchen to finish their closure checklist. Ron stood near the door, quiet as ever. I was called back in at 3:18. Before I opened the door, I wiped my hands on my apron even though they were clean. I had spent weeks imagining some version of this room, and none of those versions included how tired I would feel. I thought victory would feel hot. It felt cold and heavy. Maybe because I was still wearing the same non-slip shoes I had opened in. Maybe because the store was closed and the quiet sounded wrong. Elaine gestured to the chair by the wall. "Marcus, we need to clarify a few items from your log." Victor looked straight ahead. He did not turn when I sat down. Dana came in with my notebook open to April 9th. That was the first private meeting, the one where Victor had told me to worry about mopping. I had written it down that night from memory, including the quote. I had not known whether anyone would care. Now Dana read it aloud in the same calm voice she used for temperature readings. April 9th. Raised concerns to Victor regarding storage order, sanitizer levels, blocked hand sink, thermometer calibration, and cold holding. Victor response, quote, You worry about mopping, I'll worry about the store. End quote. The room went still. It was not the worst thing he had said. It was not even the most legally useful. But it was the line that carried the whole shape of him. Dismissive. Small. Certain that his title made him right. Certain that my job was to clean up around his decisions and keep my mouth shut. Elaine looked at Victor. Did you say that? He swallowed. I may have said something like that in a coaching context. She asked, what was the coaching? He said, that he needed to focus on assigned duties. She asked, food safety concerns are not assigned duties for a shift lead? He said, they are, but there is a chain of command. Elaine said, he brought them to you. Victor said, and I addressed them. Dana placed the audit summary beside the notebook. The findings today match the concerns he raised. Victor's eyes moved to the pages. I watched the recognition travel across his face, slower this time. He was not just realizing that the auditors had found problems. He was realizing they were reading my map. Every stop on the walkthrough had been planted weeks earlier in a notebook he thought made me annoying. The mop bucket, the hand sink, the cooler, the labels, the thermometer. The exact things he had dismissed were now being read in a meeting that might end his career. He looked at me then. Really looked. Not like I was a kid. Not like I was a problem. Like I was a door he had walked past every day without noticing it was locked from the other side. You set me up, he said. Elaine answered before I could. No, the conditions set this up. The records documented them. Victor said, he was taking pictures behind my back. Dana said, several photos document immediate corrective actions taken by Marcus after management notification. Victor said, he filed a wage complaint. Elaine's voice sharpened. Again, do not question protected activity. Victor said, this is retaliation against me. Mr. Patel said from the end of the table, finally off the phone, retaliation is cutting an employee's hours after he reports safety issues. Retaliation is threatening a certification sign-off. Retaliation is not being asked why the cooler was never serviced. Victor opened his mouth, but nothing came out. That was the first time I had ever seen him without a sentence ready. Elaine slid a printed schedule across the table. My name was highlighted. So were the dates of my hour cuts. Beside it was the email confirmation from corporate quality. Beside that was a transcript of the recording where he said my hours were cut because I became a distraction. I had sent the recording to the wage claims specialist after the state letter came in. Corporate had received it through the inquiry package that morning. Victor stared at the transcript like the paper had betrayed him personally. You recorded me? He said. I kept my voice low. Yes. He said, that is illegal. Elaine said, legal has reviewed applicable consent rules. Continue. Victor said, you recorded your manager? I wanted to say, you threatened my paycheck and my certification in a closed office. What did you expect me to bring, vibes? But I did not. The room did not need that from me. I said, I recorded a conversation about my hours and certification. Victor said, after everything I did for you? That almost got me. Not emotionally, just from the absurdity. Everything he did for me apparently meant scheduling me when he needed coverage, editing my overtime when he did not want to pay it, and holding my sign-off hostage when I stopped being convenient. Mr. Patel leaned forward. Victor, stop making this worse. Victor said, I'm making it worse? His voice cracked on worse. He has been building a case against me for weeks. Ron spoke quietly from the door. No, he has been preserving records for weeks. You built the case. That was the line that broke him. Not dramatically. He did not scream. He did not flip a table. He just sat back. And the air went out of him. His shoulders dropped. His eyes moved from Ron to Elaine to Dana to the notebook, and then to me. In that silence, I could see him replaying every moment he had handed me. The first laugh, the overtime edit, the schedule cut, the certification threat, the meeting sheet, the unauthorized closing delay notes, the cooler texts. Paperwork makes you annoying. He had been right about one thing. Paperwork had made me annoying. Annoying enough that corporate had to read it. Annoying enough that payroll had to preserve records. Annoying enough that the state had opened a file. Annoying enough that his usual fog did not fill the room. Elaine asked him one more question. Did you edit employee time punches downward when employees had worked past scheduled end times? He looked at the audit trail. His name was on it, his manager ID, his timestamps, the old punches and the new ones. He could not blame the tablet. He could not blame me. He could not blame Nia for being slow or Carmen for having attitude. The system had kept the version of events he thought he had erased. I adjusted for unauthorized overtime, he said. Elaine asked, did they work the time? He rubbed both hands over his face. Some of it. Elaine asked again, did they work the time? Victor said, yes. Elaine asked, were they paid for it? He did not answer. That silence was the answer that mattered. Elaine closed the folder in front of her. Victor, effective immediately, you are suspended pending termination review. You will surrender store keys, safe keys, and company devices. You are not to contact employees about this matter. HR will provide next steps. He blinked twice. Suspended? Mr. Patel said, do what she said. Victor said, after 9 years? Nobody answered. There was a strange mercy in that silence. Not mercy for him exactly. Mercy for the rest of us. No lecture. No dramatic speech. Just the sound of keys coming off a ring. Victor stood up slowly. He removed the store key, the office key, the safe key, and the little key to the locked drawer where he kept extra headset batteries like they were state secrets. His hands shook. One key fell on the table and made a small bright sound. Everyone heard it. Then, because arrogance dies hard, he looked at me and said, I hope you're happy. I thought about Nia's pay stub. I thought about Carmen's son and the field trip. I thought about Jay refusing to initial a fake label. I thought about the walk-in at 47 degrees and the customers who had no idea the person saving labor was gambling with their food. Happy was not the word. So I said the only thing I needed to say. You told me to worry about mopping. His face changed again. That was the real understanding moment. Not when Elaine suspended him. Not when the wage inquiry came up. That line took him back to the office, to the day he decided I was too small to matter. I watched him remember saying it. I watched him understand that I had remembered too. The room did not move. Even the air conditioner seemed to pause between clicks. I did not finish the sentence. I did not say, so I did. I did not say. And I worried about the store too. The callback landed better unfinished because everybody in that room knew the rest. Victor looked away first. He walked out through the lobby, not the back door. I think Elaine did that on purpose, though I cannot prove it. The front door had the closure notice taped to the glass. Outside, 2 customers were reading it. One stepped aside as Victor pushed through. He had no keys, no company phone, and no store to hide inside. His sunglasses were still on his head. Through the window, I watched him stand in the parking lot for a second like he had forgotten where he parked. Then he got into his car and sat there without starting it. Carmen came up beside me with a trash bag in one hand. He still wants us to clock out on time? I looked at her. She looked at me. We both started laughing, quietly, because the auditors were still there, and because sometimes the body needs to release pressure before it knows what else to do. The store stayed closed for 3 days. Not full closed forever. 3 days for emergency maintenance, discard, deep cleaning, retraining, and a reset of opening and closing procedures. The cooler compressor was failing. The thermometer station got replaced. The ice scoop holder was fixed in under 15 minutes by a maintenance guy who looked genuinely confused that nobody had called earlier. The hand sink got a taped floor box around it so dry storage could not creep in front of it again. The mop bucket got a hook and a home, which made Carmen salute it every time she passed. During those 3 days, we were paid for scheduled shifts. That was one of the first things Elaine announced. No one was losing hours because the store had failed an audit. She said it in the lobby with everyone gathered near the counter, and I watched Nia's face when she heard it. She looked like she did not trust the sentence at first. Then she looked at me. I nodded. The wage review took longer. Corporate payroll pulled 90 days once the first 60 showed a pattern. The state specialist requested records directly. HR interviewed employees in groups and individually. The final number I heard was a little over $18,700 in unpaid wages and overtime across 12 employees, plus additional corrections and penalties handled through the state process. My own check included the original 7 hours and 18 minutes, a smaller correction from the week after, and a separate line for waiting time under the state rules. It was not lottery money. It was my money. That distinction matters. Nia was shorted the most. Across 3 checks, she had lost more than 9 hours of overtime and several regular hours shaved from late closes. When her correction hit, she sent me a screenshot with the dollar amount circled and one message. My mom apologized. I stared at that longer than I expected. Of everything that happened, that might be the part that still gets me. The money mattered. The apology mattered in a different way. Carmen bought her son's field trip hoodie and told everyone Victor had accidentally sponsored youth education. Jay got his car note caught up and brought in a label maker he bought himself because he said if we were going to be a compliant store, we might as well be annoying about it. Luis used his back pay to replace 2 tires and then spent a week telling people the tires were paid for by unauthorized closing delay. Victor was fired after the investigation, not just suspended. We heard it officially from Elaine at the reopening meeting. She did not give us the whole personnel file, obviously, but she said he was no longer with the company and that any attempts by former management to contact employees about the investigation should be reported. Nobody clapped. Real life is not that clean. But the silence felt different from the old silence. It felt like people breathing without asking permission. Ron handled retraining for 2 weeks. He did not make me a hero. I appreciated that. He made me redo sanitizer tests like everyone else. He corrected my temp log once because I forgot to initial a corrective action. When I groaned, he said, "Paperwork makes you accurate." I said, "I have heard a different version." He smiled and kept walking. My certification sign-off came from Elaine and Ron. They reviewed my course hours, my shift records, and my corrective action logs. The form had a box for supervisor comments. Elaine wrote, "Demonstrated strong food safety awareness, record discipline, and appropriate escalation." I kept a copy because after weeks of being told I lacked maturity, seeing appropriate escalation in writing did something good for my brain. I did not stay forever. That surprises some people. They think after a story like this, the protagonist becomes the new manager and everything turns perfect. I stayed 4 more months, long enough to finish the certificate, train the new closing lead, and save a little money. Then I took a job at a hospital kitchen as a production supervisor trainee. Better hours, better benefits, more hairnets than I expected, but you cannot have everything. On my last day at the fast food store, Nia was running front counter, Carmen was in drive-thru, Jay was labeling prep with almost religious intensity, and the mop bucket was exactly where it belonged. The store was still a fast food store. The fryer still beeped. Customers still complained about sauces that were in the bag. People still called out. It was not magically easy. But when the walk-in climbed 2 degrees above range, the assistant manager called service before I said a word. That was enough. About 6 months after Victor was fired, I saw him once. I was at a grocery store after my hospital shift, still wearing black work pants and shoes that squeaked on polished floors. He was in the next aisle, holding a basket with frozen pizza and energy drinks. He saw me. I saw him. For half a second, I thought he might say something. He did not. He looked down and turned his basket around. I did not follow him. I did not need to. The last time I had seen him, he was sitting in a parking lot outside a locked store, understanding too late that the kid he mocked had written down the things he should have fixed. That was the ending that mattered. If there is a lesson in it, it is not that every bad boss gets fired. They do not. It is not that reporting is easy. It is not. The lesson is smaller and more useful. When someone with power tells you that your memory is not enough, believe them. Then make records, dates, times, screenshots, photos, plain facts, boring facts, the kind that survive a meeting. Victor thought the store belonged to whoever had the keys. He was wrong. For 3 days, the store belonged to the clipboard. It belonged to the audit trail. It belonged to the employees who finally said, yes, that happened to me too. And me? I still worry about mopping. Food safety people do. But now, every time I see a clean mop bucket hanging exactly where it belongs, I think about Victor's face when Dana read my list back to him. And I remember that sometimes the smallest chore in the building is the one that tells you who is really paying attention. So if you're still listening, tell me this. Have you ever worked somewhere everyone knew the rules were being broken, but one person in charge acted like noticing was the real problem? Because I used to think that was just bad management. Now I know it is usually the beginning of the paper trail.